My Last Duchess by Robert Browning was written in 1842 and appeared in the collection Dramatic Lyrics. It is a dramatic monologue, which is a speech by a fictional character, or the imagined speech of a real figure, to a listener who remains silent throughout. The poet chooses language and uses a range of poetic techniques to reveal more about the speaker's character and personality than the character is aware of. Browning wrote a number of these dramatic monologues, often creating characters with psychopathic traits. In this poem, Browning draws upon a real historical figure, Alfonso II d'Este, who was Duke of Ferrara, a duchy in northern Italy, from 1559 to 1597, as his inspiration. Alfonso married the socially inferior but wealthy 14-year-old Lucrezia di Cosimo de' Medici in 1558, but she died only 2 years later of suspected poisoning. Alfonso then went on to marry Barbara of Austria some 4 years later. In the poem, Browning imagines that the Duke is speaking to an emissary from the family of his bride-to-be and is showing him the works of art in his private art gallery. They stop for a moment in front of the portrait of Lucrezia, ostensibly to admire her. The Duke, however, has manufactured this opportunity to tell the emissary about the background of the painting, what happened to his late wife, and a hint that his prospective bride may share a similar fate if she does not act with the strict decorum he expects at all times. The poem is 56 lines long and is written in iambic pentameter, di-dum, 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 di-dum. This is the same metre as that used by Shakespeare and the other Elizabethan dramatists, and contributes to the feeling that this poem is a speech taken from a play. While Shakespeare wrote in blank verse, however, without the constraints of rhyme, Browning has a much more tightly controlled structure, as the poem comprises 28 rhyming couplets, i.e. they follow a rhyme scheme of A, A, B, B, C, C, etc. There is extensive use of enjambment and caesura throughout. Browning skillfully uses these techniques to control whether meanings of lines spill over into the next, or to pull them up short partway through a line, to paint a portrait of a man who, while he is in control of the interaction, is also struggling to contain his anger. Browning also varies sentence length and syntax to show a man who is a very adept and manipulative orator. The title, My Last Duchess, is worthy of some discussion. The possessive pronoun my not only indicates to the reader that this is to be a first-person narrative, but also hints at the Duke's opinion that his wife is a possession to be taken on and disposed of at will. The adjective last implies that she is just one in a sequence and that there will be a next, in the same way that someone might talk about a commodity, such as their last car or their last house. Duchess refers to her title and not to her name. This, along with the fact that it ties her identity to that of the Duke, dehumanises not only her, but also, by implication, her successor. The poem begins with the Duke introducing the portrait of his last Duchess, which has been painted directly on the wall. The tone is quietly menacing from the start. His comment, looking as if she were alive, is ostensibly to compliment the artist on his skill. What it also does, though, is remind us that she is in fact dead. The way in which he calls that piece a wonder now, with a pause before the word now, is ominous, suggesting that he hasn't felt so warmly about it in the past, and that he is only able to fully appreciate it now that she is dead. Browning introduces the fictional painter Fra Pandolf using synecdoche. He only refers to his hands to represent the whole person. This effectively dehumanises him and starts to build up a picture of the Duke's perception of those around him as mere commodities to be used. The Duke's power and control are evident in his use of a rhetorical question. Will it please you sit and look at her? As a means of commanding his listener to sit down. The next sentence stretches from line 5 to line 13 and has complex syntax, with nested clauses and phrases which needs a little unravelling. I said Frau Pandolf by design just means that he has mentioned the name of the artist deliberately. The next part is spread over the entire sentence, with interspersed clauses and phrases giving additional detail, which we will remove in order to get to grips with the meaning of the sentence as a whole. For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, but to myself they turned, and seemed as they would ask me how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. We can render it like this. People who don't know me always look at the painting of that face, and turn to me as if to ask how she came to have that expression. So you're not the first to look as though you wanted to ask me that. The Duke has an agenda. He needs to steer the topic of conversation around to his late wife's unacceptable behaviour and its consequences, so that the emissary can trot back to his master and let him know the ground rules for this prospective union. Here the Duke shows himself as a master manipulator by inferring a question from his listener which has not been articulated or spoken aloud, relating to a quality of the painting, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, that he himself has interpreted, and which his listener would not dare to contradict, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst how such a glance came there. The Duke is putting words into the emissary's mouth. Note that he does not say that they would ask him, but that they seemed as they would ask him. The Duke clarifies this with, if they durst, or if they dared, designed to intimidate his listener into remaining silent. The Duke also reveals much about his jealous and controlling nature in the parenthetical comment, "Since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I." Even in his own private gallery, the Duke controls access to the painting. It can't be taken down because it is painted on the wall, so he keeps it covered with a curtain. He remains jealous even now she is dead, and only allows her deep and passionate, earnest glance to gaze on him. The Duke reveals over the next 3 lines what his problem was with his wife. "Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek." This statement leads the listener to believe that some other man is involved and that she has been unfaithful. Far from it. The Duke seems to have whipped himself up into a frenzy of jealousy, imagining what the innocent painter may have said to her while she was sitting for her portrait. "Her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much," or "Paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat." Note that even in the Duke's imagining of what Frau Pandolf may have said about the inability of paint to accurately depict the subtleties of her complexion, he cannot stay away from the language of death, which foreshadows her own demise. He describes her reaction. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. Note that the Duke does not suspect her of infidelity. He indicates that she thought such stuff was courtesy, or merely a couple of polite remarks. This makes his crime even more heinous. He has killed her because he was jealous that she blushed with pleasure over nothing more than a respectful request and a polite compliment given by an artist charged to paint a beautiful portrait of her. The repetition of the phrase, "that spot of joy," to describe her blushing cheeks communicates this unhealthy fixation on what is actually a physiological reaction that she was unable to consciously control. Once more, the Duke uses his skill as an orator to feign awkwardness and to manipulate his listener. Note the use of caesura twice in this line, as he adds a parenthetical rhetorical question. "She had a heart how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed, as though the subject is a delicate one and he is struggling to come up spontaneously with just the right words. The Duke is trying to persuade his listener that these comments are an off-the-cuff response to a question he inferred from someone's expression, instead of an elaborate and orchestrated ploy to threaten and intimidate the family of his wife-to-be. The Duke accuses his late wife of not being discerning in what gave her pleasure. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. His short exclamation, "Sir, 'twas all one," juxtaposed with the preceding much longer sentences, gives away the fury that is bubbling just under the surface that the memory of his wife's imaginary transgressions has ignited. He proceeds to list the things that gave her pleasure. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace. His irrationality and psychopathic jealousy is made clear as he reveals the pleasure which his wife took from such innocent occurrences as the sunset, the gift of some cherries, and the riding of a white horse, and his outrage that she should be equally pleased at these as at the brooch or jewel that he had given to her. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. Browning once more uses caesura to portray the Duke's continued pretence to struggle to find the right words. She thanked men. Good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. The Duke's pride is clear here. All the favour has been on his side, as he, an aristocrat with a pedigree going back almost a millennium, has married his social inferior, who is oblivious to this great honour that he has done her. He considers her title a gift, although the Duchess will have paid heavily for it, not only with her dowry, but also with her life. The rhetorical question, who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling, shows the Duke's unbending nature and his refusal to make any allowances for his young wife. He dismisses the idea of talking to her about her behaviour out of hand. Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and make excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Note once again in this lengthy and fluent section that the Duke claims, quite erroneously, in a parenthetical comment, that he lacks skill in speech. Perhaps his false modesty is designed to evoke some sympathy in his listener as he makes out that he has been put in an impossible position. The use of polysyndeton here adds to the unrelenting nature of his speech and enhances his uncompromising nature as he builds up his logical argument. She couldn't win whatever she did. If she allowed herself to be educated by him or lessoned, or even if she made excuse for her behaviour, it would still mean some stooping or a loss of dignity on his part, which he chooses never to do. The Duke unwittingly reveals the emotional and physical distance in their relationship when he says, "Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whene'er I passed her," as though they only seemed to meet by chance in the corridors or gardens around the palace. Her tendency to smile much the same smile to others who passed her increased until the Duke was driven to breaking point. This grew. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. Note the use of a triadic structure here, with short related clauses linked by semicolons. Gone are the flowery language and strangulated syntax of previous sentences. The Duke shows that he is able to be concise when he needs to be, and this highlights the uncompromising haste with which he acted. Note also the use of euphemism in the form of synecdoche to allude to her death, which depersonalises her. In the Duke's eyes, she has become synonymous with her smiles, which he has been compelled to remove. The Duke comes full circle and signals the end of his speech by repeating, "There she stands as if alive. Will it please you rise?" He then goes on to conclude the negotiations regarding his prospective marriage by stating, "The Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed." In other words, he is telling the emissary that everyone knows the Count is so generous or munificent that his own claim for a dowry is perfectly reasonable, and he does not expect it to be rejected. The way in which he hastens to add that the main purpose of the marriage is to gain his fair daughter's self shows that this is an afterthought and betrays his true intentions. They continue through the gallery, with the Duke pointing out other treasures to be admired, such as Neptune taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. This not only relegates the Duchess to being just another object in his gallery, but once more underlines both his vanity, through the name-dropping of the fictional Claus of Innsbruck, and his all-encompassing desire for control, demonstrated in his choice of subject matter for the sculpture. It is clear that the Duke does not collect objets d'art because he appreciates them, but because they are a means of demonstrating his social status and his power. What emerges from this dramatic monologue is the image of a teenage bride in an arranged marriage to a much older nobleman, who was oblivious to the displeasure she was causing through her innocent displays of pleasure and gratitude, and who was murdered because of this. Browning skillfully creates a portrait of a controlling master manipulator with psychopathic tendencies, who is consumed by jealousy and hatred, but who knows how to use language, money, and power to get what he wants. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.